Secret of the Indian, chapter 3, which is how it all started. And I think what they like to do in this chapter is explain everything that happened to lead up to this point. So some of it might seem like, oh yeah, we already know that, but it's good to review it before we hear some more in the story. It had all started more than a year before with an old tin medicine cabinet Gillen had found, a key that fit it, which had belonged to Omri's great-grandmother, and the little plastic figure of an American Indian that Patrick had given Omri, second-hand, for his birthday. On that fateful night, Omri had put the Indian into the small metal cupboard and locked it with the fancy key. There was no particular point to this, really. Thinking back later, Omri didn't know why he'd done it. He'd had a thing at the time about secret cupboards, drawers, rooms, hiding places, kept safe from prying eyes, where he could secrete his favorite things and be sure they'd stay exactly as he'd left them, undisturbed by rummaging brothers and anything else. But the Indian didn't stay as he'd left it. Some combination of the key and the cupboard, plus the stuff the Indian was made of, plastic, had worked the wonder of bringing the little man to life. At first, when this happened, Omri, once past the first shock of astonishment, had thought he was in for the fun trip of all time. A little live man with his very own to play with, but it hadn't turned out like that. The Indian, Little Bear, was no mere toy. Omri soon found out he was a real person, somehow magicked into present-day London, England from the America of nearly 200 years ago. The son of the chief of the Iroquois tribe, a fighter, a hunter with his own history and his own culture, his own beliefs and morals, his own brand of courage. Little Bear regarded Omri as a magic being, a giant from the world of the spirits, and was at first terrified of him. Omri could see he was afraid, but the Indian was incredibly brave and controlled, and Omri soon began to admire him. He realized he couldn't treat him just as a toy. He was a person to be respected, despite his tiny size and relative helplessness. As it turned out, he was by no means the easiest person in the world to get along with or satisfy. He had demands, and he made them freely, assuming Omri to be all-powerful. He demanded his own kind of food, a longhouse such as the Iroquois used to sleep in, a horse, although previously he had never ridden, weapons and animals to hunt, and a fire to cook on and dance around, and eventually he even demanded that Omri provide him with a wife. In addition, Omri had tried to hide him and protect him, and it needed only a little imagination to realize what would happen if any grown-up should find out that the cupboard, the key, and the magic properties were there. Because Omri soon found out that not just Little Bear, but any plastic figure or object would become alive or real by being locked in the cupboard. But he couldn't keep the secret entirely to himself. His best friend, Patrick, eventually found out about it and lost no time in putting his own little plastic man into the cupboard. And so Boo-Hoo Boone, the crying Texas cowboy, had come into their lives, complicating things still more. For, of course, cowboy and Indian were enemies and had to be kept apart until a number of adventures and their common plight, being tiny in a giant's world, brought them together and made them friends and even blood brothers. Omri bought the plastic figure of the Indian girl and brought her to life as a wife for Little Bear, and shortly after that it was decided with deep reluctance by the boys that having 3 little people and their horses around amid all the dangers that threatened them in the boys' time and world was more than they could cope with. It was just too much responsibility. So they sent them back. For the cupboard and the key worked also in reverse, transforming real miniature people back into plastic and returning them to their own time. Omri hadn't intended ever to play with this dangerous magic again. It had been too frightening, too full of problems, and too hurtful in the end when he had to part with his friends that he'd grown so fond of. But as with so many resolutions, this one got broken. About a year later, by which time Omri and Patrick's families had both moved, Omri won a prize in an important competition for a short story. The story he wrote was called The Plastic Indian and was all about, well, it was about the truth, of course, but no one thought about that. They just thought Omri had made up the most marvelous tale. And he was so excited. The prize was $300. He was to receive it at the big party at the London Hotel, and even his brothers were impressed, that he decided to bring Little Bear back to life, just long enough to share this triumph with him, since he had been such a vital part of it. Unfortunately, things were not so simple. Remember this part? When he brought back Little Bear to tell him about the prize. When Omri put Little Bear, Bright Stars, and their pony, the plastic figures of them, back in the cupboard, they emerged much changed. Little Bear lay across the back of the pony with 2 musket balls in his back, very near death. There had been a battle in his village between 2 tribes, their tribe and their enemies, the Algonquins, together with French soldiers. Omri had already learned that the French and the English had been fighting in America at the time, and Little Bear's tribe was on the English side. Little Bear had been wounded. Bright Stars, although on the point of having a baby, was rushed out and heaved Little Bear onto his pony so the magic worked bringing them back, tiny as before, but as real as ever and in desperate trouble, to Omri's attic bedroom. And thus it was that Omri was launched into a whole series of new and even more hair-raising and challenging adventures. Luckily, Patrick was nearby and was able to come and help with some excellent ideas. And Boone came back too, and they also brought to life a hospital matron from a much more recent era to help save Little Bear's life. And later, when he demanded to go back to his village, a British Royal Marine Corporal, Willie Fickets, and a contingent of Iroquois brave were brought to life to help take revenge on the Algonquins. At this point, there was the most incredible turn of events. Boone, the cowboy, suggested that the boys go back to Little Bear's time and witness the battle, and of course they thought it was impossible. How could they fit into a tiny bathroom cupboard only about a foot high? But Boone pointed out that the magic key might fit something larger, the old seaman's chest that Omri had brought to the market, for instance. And it worked. And each boy climbed in turn, and the other one turned the key, and each separately went back in time to the Iroquois village. And when Omri got back, terribly shaken after witnessing a horrific battle, his hair was singed, and he had a burn blister on the side of his head. The boys brought the Indian troop back through the magic of the key, discovering to their horror that the modern weapons they had given the Little Bear's men, Little Bear called them now guns, had proved too much for the fighters accustomed to bows and arrows. Many of them had been accidentally shot by their own side. Matron had to be brought back to treat their wounds, but 8 had been killed. Little Bear was distraught, but Bright Stars comforted him by putting his new son, Tall Bear, in his arms. And Omri and Patrick took the blame. They shouldn't have sent the modern weapons back into the past. But these worked very well when later 3 skinheads tried to burglarize the house. And the boys brought some plastic marines to life and mounted an artillery assault on them, just as they were rifling Omri's parents' bedroom, and completely routed them. It was exhilarating while it lasted, but now they were faced with the aftermath, reality, the present, the results of the night's doing. So remember, this is that very night where the second book stopped. The boys sat on the floor of Omri's bedroom and conferred in low voices. "We've got to plan what to do," said Patrick. "One of us must be up here in your room on guard every minute of the rest of the weekend. We'll have to keep your door locked from inside. Whoever's not here will have to bring food and stuff, so I'd better stay up here most of the time. It'll look dead odd if I start nicking stuff from your kitchen. I don't know what we're going to do on Monday." Omri said heavily, "I do. I'll have to go to school, and you're going to have to go home." "Oh, yeah," said Patrick, remembering. Patrick now lived in Kent with his mother, and they were in London only for a brief time to visit his aunt and his girl cousins, Emma and that dreadful Tamsin. They'd have been back in their country home already if Tamsin hadn't fallen off her bicycle and hurt herself, so that Patrick's mother had decided to stay on for a day or two to help his aunt. The boys sat in heavy silence. Omri could hardly bear the situation, or the thought of being left alone in this increasingly difficult situation. Patrick could hardly bear the thought of leaving it. "Maybe Tamsin will die," Patrick said darkly, "and then we'll have to stay on for the funeral." Omri hoped this was only a sick joke. He hated Tamsin, but he didn't wish her dead. Not now that he'd seen death in real life. Not with those 8 small blood-stained bodies lying under torn-up scraps of sheet right there in his room. "What are we going to do about the casualties?" he said. "You mean the dead ones? We're going to have to bury them." "Where?" "In your garden." "But we can't. It's not like when Boone's horse died. They're people. We can't just stick them in the earth. What about their families?" "Well, their families are back there somewhere, and we don't know where they are or when they are. Maybe we ought to send them back through the cupboard to their own time." "Send their dead bodies back? With modern bullets in them?" "Their people would think they've been shot by white men, which they wouldn't even examine them, and they'd go through, whatever special rituals they have and bury them properly, or whatever you do with dead people there." Abruptly, Omri's eyes felt like they were going to cry again, and a hard, hot lump came in his throat. He put his head down on his knees. Patrick must have been feeling the same, because he squeezed Omri's arm sympathetically. "It's no good feeling too much," he said, after clearing his throat twice. "I know it's terrible, and I know it's partly our fault, but they lived in dangerous times, fighting and risking death every day. And they went into the battle quite willingly." "Well, yeah, but they didn't know what they were up against with the now gun," said Omri in a muffled voice. "Yeah, I know. Still, it doesn't help to be a Boone." The weak joke about the crybaby cowboy made Omri chuckle just a little. "Where is Boone, by the way?" he asked, sniffing back his tears. "I told you, I sent him back. He asked me to. I gave him a new horse, and off he went. Look." He opened the cupboard, and on the shelf was Boone. Standing beside his new horse, a tall, alert-looking black one. On the floor of the cupboard, Corporal Fickets and his men were clustered together with their various weapons. Patrick gathered them all up, put the soldiers back in the biscuit tin, but kept Fickets and Boone separate. Boone went into his pocket, horse and all. He had always kept him there when he wasn't real for luck. He was actually as fond of Boone as Omri was of Little Bear. Omri put Fickets in the back pocket of his jeans. The only thing we can do right now is to get some sleep, Omri said. Patrick settled down on the floor cushions while Omri clambered up onto his bunk bed under the skylight, and he looked up at where the stars through the branches of the old elm tree were, which his father kept saying should be cut down because it was dead. Skeletal as it was, though, to Omri it was a friend. Now remember, he's got a skylight above his bed, like a big window, and right above that is this old dead tree, because his bed is up, kind of suspended by wires. Kind of cool. Let's bring Boone back tomorrow, Patrick whispered just before they dropped off. I don't seem to be able to face things without Boone, whether he cries or not. Besides, I want to know if he likes his new horse. At dawn, Omri was awakened by a much familiar shout. Omri, wake! Day come, much need do. Omri, feeling sticky-eyed and thick-headed with tiredness, slid backwards down the ladder to the floor. Patrick was still sound asleep. The gray dawn light was just creeping through the skylight. It's dead early, Little Bear, he muttered, rubbing his face and stifling a series of yawns. Little Bear didn't hear him properly. He caught only the word and the name dead, and he nodded his hard-muscled face once more and grunted. One more dead in night. Omri's throat closed up with a sick feeling. Another, oh no, I'm so sorry. He meant sorry ashamed, not sorry regretful. He felt every dead Indian brave was on his own conscience. He never should have made the modern weapons real. Never should have sent Little Bear and his braves back in time with them. The trouble was he had still not fully accepted the fact that which he knew, that one part of his brain, that these people were real. They were not just toys come to life. They were flesh and blood with their own characters, their own lives and destinies. And against his own intentions, Omri had been drawn in. He found himself acting out his own part of these destinies, which would have never been possible but for the magic of the cupboard and the key. The key turned any container into a kind of body-shrinking time machine. His seaman's chest had taken him and Patrick back to 18th century, to Little Bear's time and place. Omri had not had time so far even to begin to think of the possibilities of that. Now he scanned the seed tray and saw that two of the Indians, who had not been injured, were carrying another body out of the longhouse and into the little paddock Patrick had made with miniature fencing for the ponies, and which was now a makeshift morgue. Matron followed the sad procession, her face rather grim at all times, now grimmer than ever. I did my best, she said shortly. Bullet was lodged in the liver. I couldn't reach it. She watched the two braves lay the dead Indian down beside the others, and suddenly she turned to Omri. I know I did an operation on your friend, she said, and I operated last night, emergency operations, 3 of them, but blow it all, I am not a surgeon. It was stupid of me, conceited to think I could cope. I can't. I'm not trained for it anyway. It's too much for one person. And her voice cracked. Matron, it's not your fault, began Omri, terrified that this capable, efficient, down-to-earth woman might be about to burst into tears, which would have unmanned him completely. I didn't say it was my fault. My fault indeed, she glared at him, took off her spectacles, polished them on a spotless handkerchief from her apron pocket, and put them back in her formidable nose. Blessed if I know how I got here, what is this all about? Now, don't you go pulling the wool over my eyes. I know when I'm dreaming and when I'm not. This is real. The blood is real. The pain is real. The deaths are real. My operations were real. They were the best I could do, but what is also real is my inadequacy. I'm not a surgeon. She suddenly snatched the handkerchief out of her pocket again and blew her nose on it. She wiped her nose back and forth several times and then gave a great, convulsive sniff. What we need here is a properly equipped medical team. Omri gaped at her. If we don't get one quickly, more of these poor men are going to die. After a moment during which she glared at him expectantly through her spectacles, Omri said slowly, I'll tell you the truth about you being here and all the rest of it, but you probably aren't going to believe me. After what I've been through in the past 48 hours, I'll believe anything, she said firmly. So he explained things as well as he could, and she listened intently and asked a couple of questions. You say any article or figure made of plastic is affected? Yeah. And objects that might be concealed on the person, my hypodermic syringe, for instance, and other things I brought in my pocket from St. Thomas's? Yeah. They're made real, provided the person who had them on them before they were brought. Well, why can't you get hold of some plastic doctors and put them in your allegedly magic cupboard? Only you must make sure they have some equipment, surgical instruments, and so forth. But all the shops are shut. How can I? Suddenly Omri remembered. 2 nights ago he had gone to see Patrick at his aunt's house, and they had tried to borrow Tamsin's new box of plastic figures, only she'd caught them at it and grabbed them back, and Omri had just managed to hold on to the figure that turned out to be Matron. But there had been others in the set, including a surgeon with an operating table. He stretched out his foot and nudged Patrick awake. Patrick, listen. There's another Indian dead, and matron says if we don't find the proper doctors, more will die. Patrick scrambled his feet, rubbing his hair. How can we get any new ones on Sunday? What about the ones Tamsin has? What are you saying? That I should go back to Auntie's and nick them while Tamsin isn't looking? It's only borrowing. Not when the owner doesn't know or agree. Not when the owner is my little creep of a cousin. She'll have my guts for garters. Army said with a note of desperation. Well, what are we going to do then? This is a real emergency. Suddenly he had an idea. Why don't we try buying them off her instead? That might work. You got any dough? Oh, not a penny. We spent it all on the Indian braves. Maybe Dad will lend me a couple of dollars. Well, Omri's dad did better than that. He gave them each $5, and not just till payday. You've earned it, he said. Here's one for Patrick, too. So there was no problem about money. At breakfast, hastily eaten, the boys sneaked some crispy bits of bacon and quite a few crunchy nut flakes into their pockets, and Omri astonished his mother by asking for a mug of tea instead of a milk, and because matron could not cope without her tea. I thought you hated tea. I'm coming around to it. Cha, you'll be hitting the scotch next, commented his father from behind the Sunday paper. Patrick nudged Omri. When whiskey was mentioned, there was just one person who came to mind. Who would that be? Boone. Halfway back up the stairs, Patrick whispered, Let's bring Boone back to life right now before I leave. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Omri went back down and opened the door, and then he gasped. Outside stood Tamsin, of all people. How could it be? She broke her leg. Omri looked again. Oh, it wasn't Tamsin, it was Emma. Emma was Tamsin's twin sister, and she was the spitting image of Tamsin, and yet she was wholly different. As far as Omri could remember, she was quite a decent sort of a girl. Hello, Omri, she said. Can I see Patrick? Patrick dragged himself reluctantly down into the hall, and Omri stood aside waiting. He could feel himself tensing all over for fear that there was a car outside waiting to cart Patrick away. Hi, Em. How's it going? Said Patrick carelessly. Okay, Tam's leg's in a cast and she's better, and they sent me here because Omri's phone's busted and your mom couldn't ring you and you're to come back with me. Right now? Yeah. I can't come now. Why not? Patrick dithered helplessly, trying to think of some excuse. How are we supposed to get back? On the train, of course, said Emma. Come on. Omri said, Did you come here on the train? Yeah, why? And you walked up the road to here from the station? Yeah. Omri thought of the skinheads. It was Sunday, and even the few who went to school or had jobs were free and on the prowl on Sundays. He himself never walked down Howell Road on Sundays if he could possibly help it. Did you meet anyone? She shrugged. A few boys hanging around, real creeps, gross. I took no notice of them. Omri shivered, but then he remembered. There was a pretty good chance he didn't have to be scared of that gang anymore. He put his hand in his jeans pocket and fingered the little penlight the smallest of the burglars had dropped the night before. As he touched it, he felt something else, and it was the key. A sudden flash of inspiration came to him, stiffening his whole body like a bolt of electricity. Emma, he said in a weird sort of voice, would you mind if I had a private chat with Patrick before, he goes? She looked from one to the other and said, What's the secret? They both flushed. Wait here, okay? Omri gabbled, and he pulled Patrick into the living room and closed the door. You've got to get out of going home, Omri said. I can't cope without you. What can I do, break my leg? Well, if you had the nerve for it, you could throw yourself down the stairs and probably do yourself some serious enough injury. Yeah, thanks a lot. But I wasn't thinking of that. Tell Emma you've left something upstairs, and we're going to go up to my room, and you can get in the chest with Boone's figure, and I could send you back to his time. Is that a good idea? He's supposed to go home right now. Send him back to that time? The 1800s?